For the most part, Amazon Prime's animated series Invincible is very in keeping with the comics and does a great job at bringing the content to the screen, but there are still some notable differences between the animated series and the comics it's based on. And that's why, in this video, we are going to take a look at every change this show makes. Let's dive in. One of the biggest changes from the comics to the show is the influence of the alien antagonists, the Flaxxans. In fact, the Flaxxan Invasion is actually one of the biggest elements of the early comics, and the storyline sees both Mark and Omni-Man team up to take on the invading aliens. However, the Flaxxans actually capture Omni-Man during the assault and end up taking him back to their homeworld. In the show, Omni-Man is at the time incapacitated after his slaying of the original Guardians of the Globe, so Mark finds himself fending off the Flaxxans with the team in what is their first outing together. However, they struggled to deal with the alien hordes, and when all seemed lost, Omni-Man made his return and sent the Flaxxans packing.
My turn.
But that wasn't quite enough for Omni-Man, and Omni-Man being Omni-Man, decided to follow them through their portal and lay waste to their entire planet. Some remnants of the Flaxxan population did survive the Omni-Man destruction though, and they were teased at the end of season 1, suggesting that the green-skinned extraterrestrials, who are major villains in the comics, will have some unfinished business with Omni-Man. As we mentioned, Omni-Man is actually captured by the Flaxxans and taken back to their planet by force, as opposed to willingly like the show. And by cutting out this element of the comics, the show completely negates an entire storyline of Omni-Man Off-World. In the comics, after being abducted by the aliens, Omni-Man manages to make his escape before leading an entire revolution, which leaves their plans of a full-on invasion of Earth in tatters. While Omni-Man is now off-world in the show, and could feasibly have this story with the vengeful Flaxxans later on, it's more likely that he'll follow another storyline that happened in the comics, one that we will not mention here as, spoilers. In both the show and the comics, assuming you hadn't read the comics before watching the show, Omni-Man brutally murdering the Guardians of the Globe was a true shock in both a story sense and in terms of Omni-Man's true character. But there is a difference between the murders, and that is timing. In the show, Omni-Man's true self is revealed at the end of the first episode, which is likely done to keep viewers invested and on the hook, and it subsequently sets up the story arc between Omni-Man and his son Mark and their inevitable showdown. In the comics, the murders take place much later, happening in the 10th issue, and is actually a lot quicker, as Omni-Man systematically takes the Guardians down one by one before revealing himself as the killer to the sole survivor, Immortal. As you probably guessed though, it is also a bloodthirsty and gory affair with Omni-Man ruthless in his work, but it leaves him a lot less depleted than he is in the show. Even if you have not read the comics, you probably still have guessed that there is a budding romance taking place between Mark and Adam Eve. In the comics, Mark and Adam Eve are actually the core relationship, with them coupling up as the years go by, but the show seems to quickly be making a love triangle between Mark, Adam Eve, and Amber, and they are doing this by providing Amber more substance and a stronger personality.
Good for you, Mark.
In the show, she actually works out that Mark is invincible all on her own, while in the comics, she only learns his true identity after Mark tells her. By providing more material and having a great actress such as Zazie Beetz to play the character, it could potentially mean that the triangle will play out differently over time, and it'll be interesting to see who will be the recipient of Mark's attention. Who would you rather see him with? Are you Team Amber or Team Adam Eve, huh? Let us know.
Team? I don't know.
There are so many deaths in Invincible, in particular the season finale, that you would be forgiven for forgetting the death of GDA official Donald Ferguson at the hands of Omni-Man. This, however, is entirely different from the comic books, and although Donald is by no means a major figure in the comics, he actually survives the Omni-Man onslaught and continues living for some time, and is even eventually revealed to be an android. However, it is understandable why the show decided to kill him off, as it added even more weight to the scene and to Omni-Man's actions, and also showed how near indestructible the vitriol might is. As we mentioned earlier, Mark's first meeting with the teen team comes during the Flaxxan Invasion, but seeing as that story is very different in the comics, it will be no surprise to learn that Mark meets them in a different fashion. Instead of meeting them during an alien invasion in the comics, Mark comes across the teen team shortly after developing his powers while on patrol, and it is a lot less exciting than how it's done in the show. When it comes to superhero monikers, it's best to find one that describes you and your attributes, but also sounds pretty darn cool. And for instance, the name Invincible is pretty fitting for Mark, as he has managed to survive numerous beatdowns, and it does admittedly inspire confidence. In the show, Mark adopted the moniker after it was bestowed upon him from his father, Omni-Man, who also has a fitting name, seeing as Omni is short for omnipotent, shortly after he develops his powers. But as you probably guessed, this is different in the comics, and it actually derives from the moment Mark's principal tells him he's not invincible, and Mark, being a classic teenager, decides not to listen to him, falling in love with the name and adopting it as his own. One of the characters who is most changed in the show is Mark's mother, Debbie. In the show, she is a lot more fleshed out and has a stronger personality than her comic counterpart, who is mostly much more passive. In fact, in the show, Debbie comes to grow suspicious of Omni-Man and his part in the Guardians' murders, and after the evidence presented by Damien Darkblood, begins investigating her husband.
Did you do it?
I didn't do anything.
Don't lie to me!
In the comics, however, she is relatively clueless when it comes to Omni-Man's true self, and only finds out the moment that Mark does. A notable omittance in Invincible is the character Science Dog. Now, while there is an Easter egg to the character, with the reference of anthropomorphic sorcerer Seance Dog, the mystical mutt, left out of the main show, but who has his own backstories in the comics. Invincible creator and The Walking Dead creator, Robert Kirkman, did allude to the reason that Science Dog was left out, saying that they kept him out of the deal with Amazon as they wanted to keep the option for Science Dog's very own screen adaptation open in the future. Another difference between the show and the comics, which comes down to timing, is Mark's friend, Will's sexuality. Will is also gay in the comics, but the difference is that his sexuality isn't revealed until later on, while in the comics, he's out in the very first episode, and it is not a secret Will hides and is just an open part of his character. It's not a drastic change, but a difference nonetheless. One big change between the show and the comics is that the series is much more diverse. For instance, Mark himself is biracial and is Korean American, just like his mother Debbie, while Amber in the show is black, and Green Ghost and Shrinking Ray have been gender swapped. On the subject of diversity and representation, Kirkman said, quote, "I think representation matters, especially in the world of superheroes," end quote. And the writer seems to be going out of his way to make sure that the show is indeed more diverse. Another character who was given more substance early on and a fast-tracked timeline is GDA head Cecil Stedman. Cecil doesn't become a major character till later on in the comics, and does not strike up a relationship with Mark until after his fight with his father. Maybe they're setting up Cecil being the villain in season 2? Despite there being an absolute boatload of great villains already, such as Titan, Battle Beast, the Mauler twins, Doc Seismic, and of course Omni-Man, all of whom will pose a threat to Mark moving forward.
Who's next?
Hello, boy.
There are actually a number of side villains from the comics who did not make it into the show. This may have been done to streamline the series and make sure to avoid the Spider-Man 3 pitfall of villain overload, but it's likely that these villains could also make their debut in the show at some point in the future. One villain who is more than likely to appear in Season 2 or potentially Season 3 is Angstrom Levy, who has a deep-seated grievance with Mark and also has a connection to the Mauler twins in the comics. Another minor change, but one that helps flesh out the character of Mark, is the fact that he struggles to learn how to fly. In the comics, he basically becomes in tune with his powers very early on and doesn't struggle when it comes to flying, but in the show, learning the ropes and developing his powers doesn't come easy, and he struggles to become airborne.
Yeah, I think I got it.
It doesn't look like you do.
This shapes up Mark's arc in the earlier season, and how his lack of experience and how he's naive leads him to struggle in his newfound role as a superhero, and paves the way to his inevitable defeat at the hands of Omni-Man. Speaking of the fight between Mark and Omni-Man, let's discuss their soul-crushing fight, which I am not over fully. Seriously, I haven't talked to my dad in weeks. The fight between the two in the show is actually very similar to the comics, but there are a number of minor changes. For one thing, the GDA has no active role in the fight in the comics, while Omni-Man's spitefulness is heightened, with him telling Mark that your mother means nothing to me as the duo scrap.
You love me! You love Mom!
She's more like a pet to me.
But the actual ferocity and bloodlust of Omni-Man is lower in the comics than it is in the show. Omni-Man in the show goes out of his way to kill people to try and teach Mark, in his mind, a valuable lesson. But in the comics, the multiple deaths are nothing more than side effects of the fight and mean nothing to Omni-Man. Either way, Omni-Man? Yeah, he's still a grade A douche though. And finally, the Hellboy Rorschach parody. Damien Darkblood might have been one of the best and coolest characters in the show, but he's actually a bit of a joke in the comics and only figures out the case after it's already been solved.